Hello.
Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about
I'm curious about
Building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
A lot of couples that come to my office, one person really wants more dirty talk and the other person is perfectly willing but has no idea where to start. So one of the things, and this works in person or by text.
Welcome to the Curious Fox podcast. This is the podcast for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Effy Bloom.
And I'm Jacqueline. And on this episode, we're going to be talking with the incredible Stella Harris about the current state of affairs and the impact on our relationships. And particularly, how can we communicate for connection and increased empathy? Stella facilitated an in-person workshop for us on the anatomy of the vulva a few months ago. And it was informative, it was hilarious, and it was incredibly applicable because I know that I practiced everything that I learned immediately when I got home. She is a certified intimacy educator, a sex coach, and she uses a variety of tools to guide and empower her clients, both through teaching about anatomy, also communication skills and kink and BDSM. And her first amazing book, Tongue-Tied, Untangled Communication in Sex, Kink, and Relationships, is going to be the basis for our upcoming workshop on Wednesday, April 22nd. So hopefully you can join us there. And she just recently submitted her second manuscript for her second book. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yay. So how are you? You are in Portland right now.
I am. Yeah, I'm in Portland,
How are
Oregon.
How are things going over there?
You know, I mean, it's scary and weird like it is for everybody. So far, Oregon seems to be, it's a little less intense here than it is in some parts of the country right now, which is good. A lot of people are staying home. People are taking care of each other, taking care of their communities. So for folks who have the ability to stay home, they are doing that. And of course, a lot of people still have to go to work. But overall right now, Portland is, I think, one of the mellower spots in the country.
And Stella, so what is your setup? Your home? Are you with somebody? Are you on your own? What does your bunker look like?
My bunker is pretty much me and my dog. I do usually live with a housemate, but she is spending this time at a partner's place.
So you have this place all to yourself.
I do, yeah. It's basically me and my dog and a lot of video chats.
I hear you. Tell you why we were talking about this earlier. I just got a dog a few months ago, and it's a godsend. I had a hot second when I had doubts about getting a dog, because I got him. I love him. He's wonderful. Then I was having these what have I done? It's such a big responsibility. And then this happened, and it turned out to be the best decision I've ever made.
Yeah, it's really helpful to have another living creature around, and she's really good for anxiety. It's nice, if I'm starting to get to a panic place and then I just see her curled up in a ray of sunshine, sort of not worried about anything, that can be sort of helpful to be like, okay, things are scary, but also all of our immediate needs are met. We are warm, we're safe, we're fed, there's sun. And just try to take it to a dog's level.
Yeah. I learn from my dog every day. It's like everything, everyone, and everything is a teacher, and I'm surprised at how much I learn from my dog every day.
Yeah, it was interesting because I think I'm learning more about them. I don't have a dog, but my partner has in the past, and she's walked dogs and takes care of dogs. But during this particular time, she hasn't been able to because no one is letting their dog out to be walked or house sat. And it's really impacting how she's feeling. I think it's amplifying some of the fear and some of the other things because she doesn't have access to a dog in that way. So I think I'm seeing through that, the connection that exists there. And now I'm like, oh, we need to get a dog. not after all this. Right now I'm surrounded by people, so I actually don't need a dog, but maybe once we're set free.
For the next pandemic, I have a dog handy.
Exactly. Yes. Right now I'm surrounded by partners and my child. And so I feel like properly, saturated by connection.
Yeah. And that's what we're going to talk about today, right? We're going to talk about the two aspects of what we're dealing with, which is one, to be away from partners, sweeties, loved ones, lovers, and then to be kind of isolated with them, and and sort of the tensions and the the heavy heart and all that kind of stuff that can come along with that.
So I'm interested, Stella, because certainly before this pandemic, we struggled communicating with each other. And we both, in sexual instances, but just in terms of communication and relationships and around our needs and our wants and things like that. So I'm wondering if you can kind of give us a synopsis of what you learned in the work and the research that you did for your book and some of what you're teaching, and how then that either becomes amplified or what's happening right now, because as a coach, I imagine that you're continuing to hear how these things are becoming amplified for people in these situations. So I'm interested in, like, pre-COVID, what was the landscape and what are some of the trends that you're seeing now?
Well, these are things that we don't learn, like anything to do with sex and communication. We're not taught this. It doesn't come up in school. You have to seek out this information in some way. So a lot of people just sort of don't have some basic innate skills around this stuff. So I've spent a lot of time just helping people figure out how to communicate with partners, with loved ones, even in the workplace. So it's a skill set a lot of people haven't felt all that comfortable with. And one of the things I talk about when I'm helping people figure out how to have difficult conversations is we talk about setting yourself up for success by having as few variables as possible, by having people be in as good a shape as possible. We talk about making sure everyone is well rested and well fed and not stressed out before you have these heavy conversations. And that's not possible now. Everyone is stressed out all the time to one degree or another. So there's never really a good time for any of the heavy or the intense conversations. And there's also so much that we rely on in the nonverbal realm. This is one of the things I studied when I was, in school for sociology. I did a lot on nonverbal communication. And I don't think we realize how much we get from that until we don't have it. We're having these conversations by video chat, which are great. And I think that's helping, keep a lot of relationships strong and keeping a lot of people connected. And also, it's not the same. We're realizing what we miss. We're realizing, normally if we have a difficult conversation, we get to hold each other at the end and feel that connection and feel like we're okay. And now we don't get that. We don't get any of that soothing of another person's body heat or feeling their heartbeat. These things that are really important for regulating us, regulating our stress levels, regulating our emotions. And we don't have access to that now. So it's even more important to be able to use our words. And honestly, sometimes that's just not going to be enough.
For sure. I actually find that it can go both ways. One is that closeness that kind of supports the communication, and sometimes it's also the space. Like, I definitely notice myself that if I'm having a difficult conversation, I'm better if I'm moving, like if I'm like walking around. If I'm in the same space with a partner and we're having a difficult conversation, like I know that I'm better if I'm just like able to get up and walk and pace, maybe go into another room, come back, and that movement helps take some of the tension and some of the tension of just what I hold in my body, or maybe the anxiety of the conversation or the pressure of the conversation. And now I'm finding that you don't get to do that. Most of the time we're, sitting in the same place where our like work gear is set up. We're sort of slumped in chairs. And what we were talking about earlier, like I feel like we're just like talking heads, disconnected from our bodies. We're not, articulating. We're not using, our bodies. We're not able to walk away and like shake it off a little bit. And like you said, we're not able to like cuddle and sort of calibrate and regulate our nervous system to one another, to then to be able to get into a shared space where you can talk and explore things.
Yeah, the space issue, it seems like everyone sort of has too much or too little right now. We don't we don't have any sort of nice balance anymore. I've had a lot of both friends and clients who are navigating that. People live some people live in pretty small spaces and it is tight quarters if they are there all the time. I've worked with clients on this even before the current situation. If one partner ends up being at home because they're sick, or if both partners end up working from home, figuring out how to navigate that. How do you dedicate a space in the house that is just for you? How do you find ways to have privacy and downtime when you can't actually have physical space or physical distance? How do you indicate to somebody else that you need those things? Because we're used to someone just being available if they're in front of us.
For sure. I mean, Jackie and I talked about compartmentalization in another episode. That those of us who are master compartmentalizers, Jackie and I are it can be, it's not always a well adapted way of being, but in this case, I find like being able to compartmentalize is a great skill to have.
And even that in this time I think is really challenging, because either, and Effie and I have been talking and exploring around the distinction between connection and intimacy. And particularly for myself, for example, I feel like I have a lot of connection. So I'm also a coach and I'm a consultant. So I'm doing a lot of video calls. I'm doing a lot of phone calls. There's people in the house. So there's a lot of connection that is very different still than intimacy.
Yeah.
And before my partner and I were now we're all in the same home. Before that, we would be chatting via video or via phone. But frankly, at the end of the day, having spent the entire day on Zoom or on Google Hangout or some other platform, the idea of doing that for like social purposes, for romantic purposes, for like intimacy, my brain was exhausted of it. And then being now in the house with each other 24 hours a day, it does still feel challenging to switch off and say, now we're not in logistical mode, or like who's working, with who's going to use the headphones now. And now we're going to connect and be intimate and be romantic. That it's becoming more challenging.
Yeah, it's definitely challenging to make those transitions. If people have enough space, it's really helpful to dedicate sort of, this is the workspace and this is the intimate space, this is the family space. But of course, sometimes that's just not possible given what the actual limitations are. I really like using something about the setting to dedicate what mode you're in, changing your lighting, changing what music is playing, anything you can do to make the space feel different. This is something I've worked with people on before. So like poly folks who have multiple partners coming into their home, how do they make that feel different energetically? People will change out the sheets, have a different scent of incense or different colored lighting they put on. And we can use that too for trying to differentiate work time from personal time. As somebody who works from home a lot, I have to do that even for myself, because if I don't, I'm on my laptop all day. My laptop or my phone comes to bed with me. There's no differentiation between private time and work time. And if I don't, physically do something that tells me this is time off, I won't take that break. Going for a walk or gardening with none of my devices with me so that I actually have downtime. And that can be sort of one of those physical cues, like, oh, my phone isn't in my pocket, and that means this is truly disconnection time and I'm not available now. So seeing if there are visual or physical cues that can help with that.
Mm-hmm. One thing I'm getting from this, actually, which is something that we always end up with, which is this idea that, with all these things, it starts with the self. So you need to first and foremost figure out how you're going to connect with yourself, or, and how you are going to connect to the outside world, connect or disconnect, and what that's going to look like. It's just what I'm hearing when I just heard you describe that, it made me realize, oh, it starts with the self. Like, you need to understand for yourself, this is where I work, this is where I connect, this is where I chill, this is where I connect, remain connected to the world, this is where I disconnect and like hang out in the garden. And then that's sort of first layer.
Yeah.
And I love what you were talking about regarding like the mindset and the space. This is something that Effie has really been thinking about as it relates to our work and our events, around being the proper mindset and creating the proper environment. And so I'm thinking about, my partner has come into the space with my home with my wife now for the next few weeks. We're going to be here all together. And she has a colored light, like a blue light that she has in her bedroom at home that she brought with her and is using in the spare bedroom here to create that kind of space and that environment that like reminds her of home and feels like that. And Effie and I, when we have chatted at night night, we've changed the color light so that we're like, okay, now we're not in work mode. Now we're like talking more personally, and she'll have like a purple light and I'll have a blue light. So there's something about just light and the color of light or the shape of light around us and how that feels differently and creates different moods. So I love that you brought that up.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also scents too. I think this is the time, given that we are separated body to body, I think it might make sense that since that we haven't got another body to stimulate our body, we might have to do extra work around stimulating our own body using our senses. So, music, light, scents, all these things which otherwise we might not have thought about. Maybe this is this is kind of how we go about doing that.
And some of those things can work surprisingly well. Something I've written about before is that physical warmth can actually help stand in for emotional warmth. Like that actually works for us on a chemical level. This is part of why we want to curl up under a blanket or take a hot bath or a hot shower. This is something I did for myself just yesterday. I lit some incense and I put candles in the shower and just took a long hot shower to experience that kind of physical warmth. And also just touching yourself, touching your own body, not just masturbation, but, when's the last time you just sort of stroked your arms or experienced any physical pleasure? I'm hearing from a lot of people that, that a lot of their sort of physical maintenance stuff is falling aside. People aren't brushing their hair. They're not doing whatever kind of dolling up they would normally do. And while I am all for, hanging around in yoga pants for a few days, I'm wearing leggings right now, but I'm also doing things like, putting on eyeliner, putting on lipstick, because for me, that's what makes me feel put together. And so even if another human being is not going to see me, it adjusts my state of mind to adjust my body. So feeling a little bit put together, wearing clothes that are comfortable, but I also feel like, I look okay in them, and brushing my hair and just minding our physical self first. Because there is a point at which, after 3 weeks in sweatpants, you might not be feeling that great in your body.
And I'm interested how that translates to, because even before we were all in this situation, it was challenging sometimes to feel good in your body or to, feel attractive or to feel, or even in that space to ask for what you need or ask for what you want because of body images. And I imagine that now that could be even more amplified. So if we haven't washed our hair in a few days and we haven't changed out of our sweatpants, that like saying, I want to be, touched and kissed and all these other things might be a little bit more challenging. So I'm interested in just the exploration of that a little bit. What are some of the things that you have found do get in the way of our communication of what we want? And then again, maybe how that's being amplified right now.
Well, I think one thing that's always a problem, and this is one of the things I address in my communication class is, the number one thing that gets in the way of asking for what we want is not knowing what we want. That is always a big hurdle for folks. And I think especially now when a lot of us are anxious and deregulated and not checking in with ourselves, knowing what we want or need is more difficult than ever. These are unprecedented times. So how can we know what we need? We can feel like we want more space and more connection in the same moment. The feelings don't always make sense. And if they don't make sense to us, we can't possibly articulate them to another person.
And how are you encouraging space for people to play and figure that out? Like, what does that look like? I imagine some of that is just self-exploration, like sitting in your feelings, sitting in your needs, and not drowning them out with some way. Some of it is, I imagine, self-touch.
Yeah, and it's always a social experiment. Figure out what you think you're feeling, or even 3 things you might be feeling, and then think what might help you address those. And if it doesn't work, try something else. It can be really helpful to actually track this with some sort of journaling or one of those exercises where you create 2 columns on a page and you write what's happening on one side and how you're feeling on the other, or even adding a 3rd column if you want to add, here's how I'm feeling, here's what I'm going to do to try to affect that feeling, and then here's what the outcome was. So we can treat this just like a science lab in school and keep testing our theories. When I took the hot shower the other day, I thought that would make me feel better. Did it? Yep. So if I jot that down and remember that, like then next time I'm feeling crummy and I'm not in a great headspace for thinking, I can look at my little list. What are the list of things that tend to make me feel better? Do I need to go for a walk? Do I need to take a shower? Do I need to snuggle my dog? Am I going to bake some cookies? Just having a list of things at my disposal. And if one of them doesn't do the trick, you can then try the next one. And we can do that with other people too. Experiment with having a little bit of connection or a little bit of space. Let the other person know, I'm struggling right now. I'm not really sure what I need, but can we try such and such and see what happens?
I love that.
I love that. Trial and error is definitely, this is why I like this idea of play labs, this idea of like, let's try and see what it feels like. And a really good trick is that if you don't know, sometimes knowing, I find, is like there's a pressure in knowing. I find that sometimes if you just either think to yourself or say to the other person, take a guess, that takes the pressure of like needing to know, then when you say, like, let's just take a guess and see where it takes us. I think it can really be, it can be unblocking.
And I tell people that with sex all the time. We're just trying things, and using the word try can be really helpful. Like when you're going and trying a bunch of ice cream flavors, it's the little tiny spoon. You try as many as you want before you decide what you want a big scoop of, or maybe you get 2 scoops of different flavors. But the idea is that you're just trying a small amount to see what you think of it, see what works. So that spirit of exploration is really helpful, so that you aren't setting it up as, I know what the answer is, I know what the outcome is going to be. It's just, this is an experiment. We're trying something. This is playful. Let's see what happens.
I think one of the things that I took away from the vulva workshop that you did for us a few months back, and it was a live demo. So you had a fantastic volunteer who demonstrated, or rather you demonstrated on her different ways of touching a vulva and exploring. And part of what you did there was you said, do you like it like this, or do you like it more like this? Do you like it when it's fast like this, or do you like it when it's slow like that? As opposed to, I think you shared out that sometimes we in those spaces will say, what do you want, or what do you like, without necessarily giving space for options or trying, or we don't ask at all because we assume that we should know, or that they should know, they're going to like what we do. We should. But that idea of exploration and play, and maybe you know what you like and maybe I know, but let's see if there's something else that we find together, that like collaborative aspect of curiosity. I don't know. I think I feel like I brought that to the table before, but I don't think I did in the way that you had described before I heard it that way.
I love open-ended questions. I think open-ended questions are fantastic. And also realistically, a lot of times we don't have the answers. So yeah, that model of a choice between 2 things, it gives the person asking some concrete information to move forward with, and it gives the person being asked a narrower criteria to think about what they want. Because just thinking about what you want in a completely open-ended way, you can freeze up. But just choosing between something like faster or slower, you can wrap your head around those 2 options. And you can say, when you say, like, would you like this or that, you can also just show them, here's what it feels like faster, here's what it feels like slower. Which would you like? Just when you go to the optometrist and they have you pick between A or B, and you get to see your options and see which one works. So that can be really helpful. And it is collaborative. I mean, I say this in that class, I'm going to show you a bunch of techniques, and that's not so you can just memorize them and never talk to anybody again, which is what some people seem to hope it's going to be for. But it's so you can start there and then have that, playful exploration with somebody, start at this, and then ask all of these questions to narrow down what works for the people involved.
Stella, what do you think gets in the way of willingness to communicate around this stuff? Like, definitely not knowing what you want. I totally get that, and I'm also interested in what do you think gets in the way of us not knowing, being so disconnected from ourselves and our desires. So that's, like, I guess, one part of the question. The other thing is the willingness to the lack of willingness to have these conversations. Like, what is the thought behind someone going, I'm just going to learn all these tips and I don't want to ever talk about it?
So many things. Fear, shame, fear of vulnerability, fear of rejection. Our culture tells people they are supposed to magically be really good at sex without ever telling them how to do it. It's this essential part of our self-image and our ego. So there's a lot of pressure to be good at it. And there is this idea, not just about sex, but about anything, that if you're asking questions, that somehow is saying you're less skilled or you don't know what you're doing. So people are worried that asking question means that they seem like less of an expert. People can also feel like asking questions can show a lack of confidence. And sometimes this goes both ways. I get people in my classes who say they don't want somebody to ask for permission to kiss them. All of these consent practices that I know we're all teaching. And some people don't want that. And I think that also comes from this place, culturally, we shame people for having desires. So if you have to say, yes, I want to kiss, you're having to own that desire. And that can be uncomfortable or that can be scary. So that's another reason we don't want to have to ask. We don't want to have to talk about it. We just want the things that we enjoy to magically happen so we can feel like we are good at stuff and also not having to own the desires.
Interesting. And what are the sort of the tips or the guidance you give those people who are struggling and they're stuck in their fear, stuck in the shame, stuck in, especially for women, slut shaming is a big thing in this particular culture in the US. What are sort of the tips or guidance that you give people to navigate these blockages, these things that are in the way?
Well, the number one thing that helps with shame is talking about it. Just yesterday, I was on a phone session with a new client who started crying on the phone because she was saying things out loud for the first time ever. And that's the first step. Shame sort of thrives in secrecy. And so as soon as we can talk about it and as soon as we can share, even if the first step is admitting it to yourself or writing it down in a journal, then see if you can talk to a partner, see if you can talk to a friend or a professional, a coach, a therapist, saying these things out loud. And then hearing other people say them, finding, true stories to read or any of the amazing storytelling shows that are available now. Locally in Portland, Mystery Box Show, all of their stories are available on YouTube. They're about to do a live show on YouTube. I tell people all the time, listen to those stories because you will hear yourself in them. You will hear somebody get up there and talk about their fears about their body that you have too. And that chips away at shame. And if you're there with a partner, it's going to start those conversations for the two of you as well, because it can really help if it starts somewhere external. It can be so scary to say, I have this insecurity about my body I want to tell you about. But if you see it somewhere and then say, oh, I feel that way too, because then you're not alone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Absolutely. Or to be able to say, or just to even to be able to have a conversation about the story, to sort of give you the confidence to maybe to gauge out how your partner is gonna sort of react can help you ease into the topic. Instead of saying I have, I'm struggling with my body image, you can say, oh, wasn't it interesting, how this person explained their issues with their body, what came up for you, or which part of it. I think that's also a good way to kind of talk about something else, to give context, and then to reflect on, it made me think about this. I guess how I feel. How do you feel? For sure.
And that's also why we always want to be careful how we're talking about people. This comes up all the time. A client will say like, oh, my partner, talks about celebrities' bodies or something on TV. And, if you say something, fat shaming, body shaming, and you're thinking, well, I'm not talking about my partner. They're not X, Y, and Z thing. But people hear that and they internalize it. And they're like, okay, this is not a safe person to have that conversation with or to be vulnerable with. So just being careful in general. How are we talking about other human beings and who's overhearing that and what messages is that reinforcing?
So there's two things that I heard here so far. One is finding potentially some sort of an external thing to talk about first, to say, read something, watch something, and explore and have a conversation about those characters. What would you think about that? Or what was that about? So that it's about you, but not yet personalized about you, and then bringing it back. And I also heard this idea of approaching things with curiosity. Oh, let's try this, let's try that. Like it's an adventure, a collaborative adventure, as opposed to you should know what I want or I shouldn't have to ask you, but we're going to go on this adventure of figuring out what we both enjoy. So those are the two strategies that I heard so far, which make a lot of sense to me. And I'm interested in how that translates, particularly now for partners who are not in the same space. How is that translating virtually? Like or is there a distinction between the communication and what happens if you're in the same house together, and now what's happening with folks if they can only communicate virtually?
Well, we don't have the same cues now that someone needs to be checked in with. If you're physically in the same space with someone, you can see when it seems like they're struggling in some way. And now, you can't magically know when to text somebody when they're in a rough moment. We need to be reaching out and doing those check-ins. One of my sweeties here in town, sort of my main squeeze, um, we're texting more now than we ever did before because it's not supplemented with in-person time. We're doing good mornings and good nights every day, and text throughout the day, and video chats every couple of days, which is a lot more than we would normally do. But that's sort of important because it is in a way replacing that connection you would get from a couple of solid days together or some good snuggles. So you need to sort of reach out and ask how someone's doing, ask what they need, because that can remind somebody to check in with themselves as well.
Mm-hmm. And then how we talked about this before as well. What are the good ways to kind of initiate, or I guess differentiate between like casual conversation versus flirting versus a virtual date night versus like carry on exploring sexually without being in the same space? Like, what are some of the ways to I guess to modulate and to I modulate is the best way I can explain it. Really, modulate the continuous dialogue. Because I think what you're describing is true for a lot of people. So we've shifted a whole bunch of communication to text messages, video chats, phone calls, because we're not seeing people, and then the frequency has come up. So I'm hearing this from a lot of people. Like, we're texting from sunrise to sunset. How do we? But then that quite quickly becomes flat, right? Because you're kind of using one medium, and how do you modulate that so it doesn't seem just like this one sort of drag of a conversation?
Yeah.
Given the mood as well.
Totally. I mean, the same thing happens again when people are physically together. I have this conversation with people. If you live with somebody, how do you differentiate between incidental time when you're together just because you both live there, and time that is meant to be special or connective or date night time? And the answer to that is you say so. You differentiate it. You say, from this time to this time is a date, and here's what that means. Maybe it means, putting phones down. Maybe it means, certain kinds of connection. And we can do that as well with our digital connection. Maybe texts are your sort of standard check-ins. You set specific times aside to do video, which is a bit more connective, and then you decide what are date times. I've been doing a lot of like online movie watching with my sweetie. We'll sync up our Netflixes and have a chat window open, and we watch something together, and that's then like having a movie date night. And the same thing for the sexy chats. And I always tell people this under any circumstances, don't surprise people with explicit texts or dirty photos. Ask if it's a good time for it. And so I'm still doing that, first thing in the morning, if I take a naked selfie in bed, and then say like, hey, would you like to see this? And seeing if somebody's in the right place for it right now. Because now, especially with stress levels so high, that's doing all kinds of things to people's desire for sex. Some people are feeling really anxious and really depressed and aren't feeling in their bodies and aren't feeling sexy. And some people are feeling more desire than ever, either because it's an outlet for anxiety for them, or because, they are locked away without a partner. And that is creating a lot of desire. But there's no guarantee that the people you're wanting to connect with are in the same place you are with that. So those sort of check-ins about when is it a good time for this, and scheduling those things becomes really important. So just differentiate what kind of communication is for what purpose.
I'm so looking forward to your workshop, because this is kind of exactly what we're going to cover. Because here's the thing: for somebody who, we're in the same, arena. We're like, I talk about sex, I educate people, I coach people on the relationship side of things, but you can't really do that without sex. I definitely have the vocabulary. It's just not my natural way. Like, I don't like sexting has never been something that I've done. I don't necessarily find it particularly arousing, and I don't have a natural tendency towards it. Like, I don't think in words in that kind of way. But it is, it's a skill. It's like one of those like cool skills that you can learn. I think you can learn all this stuff. So one of the things I'm looking forward to from your workshop is to sort of how do you create intimacy in that kind of video or like sexting kind of way.
Yeah. So I've done a lot of writing about this. I even wrote the script for an AI sexting bot a while ago. So this is sort of one of my favorites.
That's amazing.
So one of the things, and this works in person or by text, a lot of couples that come to my office, one person really wants more dirty talk and the other person is perfectly willing but has no idea where to start. So whether this is by text or in person, it can be helpful to have the person who is more comfortable with it, let them sort of run the show. I recently had a sexting conversation like this with a partner because I'm really comfortable with words. And so the way it went after we, discussed and negotiated it was I would just sort of say a particular scenario and they could respond with a feeling and encouraging more. And so I do this in my book. I talk about this like playing the theater game, yes, and. So the person who's comfortable can say, and we're on this, deserted island together and we're drinking cocktails and we can feel, the waves and the sand. And the other person can just agree with that and add one thing like, yes, and you look beautiful in the moonlight. Just one thing that adds to the story, agrees with something they've said. And then the person that's more comfortable with the storytelling, can write a whole paragraph to that first person's one word, or one sentence. And that works in person or by text. But it's okay if one person is driving the story, if that's their comfort zone, as long as both people agree to that being what the arrangement is. And, you were talking about being more visual. I am seeing so many people upping their sexy selfie game right now. Friends of mine are doing things like ordering ring lights. And I am so grateful for it because then I get to be the recipient of some of these sexy pictures. That can be really empowering. Figure out how to take charge of your image that way. What happens when you play with lighting a little bit? What happens if you play with, good angles or photo editing software? And if you're more visual, great. Take pictures and send those to a sweetie.
Or video too. I imagine. Yeah. I don't know. Are there creative ways that people are using video, or each person masturbating on the other end, or maybe one person talking to the other person about what they want them to see or do, and kind of doing power roles via video. So I think there's a lot of interesting ways to play with video as well. Would you find yourself, Effy, if words aren't, is it visual, more video would be more interesting to you?
This time sucks for me because I'm a very physical person. Like, for somebody who talks a lot and is very intellectual in every other way, when it comes to sex, I am like not in my brain, fully in my body. I can't necessarily engage my when I say mouth, I can't engage my like words and the part of my brain that makes sense of the world in any kind of articulate way. My creativity doesn't live in my sexual creativity doesn't live in that sort of verbal, intellectual storytelling place. It never has, it never has. It's very like live action, here and now, physical. A lot of my cues and my feedback is often through body movement. So I always tell my partners, especially new partners, to like listen to my body. You will hear it. Like I will thrust harder, or I'll move myself, I'll move you. Like I'll touch you in a way, we'll give you directions. You just need to tune into like what my hands are doing, what my hips are doing, what my legs are doing, and don't fight it. Like if I'm pushing you in one direction, there's probably a reason for it. Just go with it, and it'll just feel better for everyone. It's like that's the kind of communication that I give to partners pre any kind of playtime, because during it's very hard for me to like compose myself, and if I do, I'd have to like snap out of it. I feel like I put on like proverbial glasses, and I'm like, get it, like take a break, explain myself, and then like go back into it again. So that's kind of my regular state. So it's for right now, it's insufficient, and that's why I'm really looking forward to learning from people like Stella, and I'm sort of looking at other educators that have like these awesome ways of igniting the parts of the brain that I don't normally use during sex.
I'm taking that in. I think because it's so true. I think what was happening for me is I'm reflecting on, I do think that I can live in both worlds. So I do think I am highly verbal and can kind of play in that space, but I think that there's a different kind of self-intimacy and partner intimacy. We can really be in your body, that I think is maybe what I have been trying to problem solve around, where I'm asking like, all right, creatively, what can you do via video? What can you do? And perhaps some of that is just now taking more time to do that for ourselves, and waiting for the exciting day when we can be with other people again. And so maybe some of that can't happen, but I think that there's a piece of me that is trying to like figure it out, like figure out the puzzle piece around how to still get that kind of connection. And yeah.
I mean, it's interesting because if you don't mind me saying, Stella, you're a storyteller. Like I've heard you tell stories. I've seen the videos of you telling stories. So you're a beautiful storyteller. And I think it kind of, it sounds like you also like verbalizing like during sex, and both, good at it and enjoy it. And to an extent, so are you, Jackie, you're kind of a storyteller too. Whereas like, if I was going to identify with something like that, first and foremost, I'm a dancer. So I'm a mover, I'm a dancer. A lot of my that kind of creative energy goes towards like movement, body, contact, improv, dance, 5 rhythms. So like I'm very much fueled through my body in that way. And I can see how that then reflects onto how we sort of come alive during sex.
Mm-hmm.
Does any of that work alone? Could you, film yourself dancing and share that with somebody? I have 2 friends right now who are taking online dance and choreography classes, and they've been putting up little videos of their dance and how they're using their body. I bet a lot of people would want to see that if you wanted to share.
Right, yeah, maybe I should do that. No, I've been doing a lot of like the communal dance, like the dance parties, that kind of stuff. I do take my 5 rhythms classes, but I haven't thought about videoing it. And it's interesting. That's not true. I did think about it for a second, and it felt very intimate, right? It made me even like I think I might find it less intimate to video like me masturbating than me dancing and sharing it with somebody. It's kind of interesting, right? I'd be more willing to, especially with like if I was sexting a stranger, or I'd like to call them a new friend. I'm more likely to send them like a somewhat semi-disguised masturbation video than like a dance video. I don't know, something.
Yeah. No, but I think that is telling though. And I think that's actually what's really interesting about this time and space too, is learning those little bits and pieces about ourselves, about, what feels that way. And I'm also find myself more inclined to, now that I'm seeing this new vehicles for connection in a different way. Again, I believe I'm oversaturated with connection, but like, even as you were saying that, like, oh, sending this type of video to a new friend, I'm like, that sounds fun. Like, I want to find new friends to try different things. Like, there's something about this has sparked our interest as both educators and community organizers, that now having this online platform and trying to create new events online, we're like, wait, there's this whole world that has been untapped. adapt, and now look at all the things we can do. And I think I'm also interested that as relates to like the sexual space of, oh, wait a minute, I hadn't thought about this or that, or maybe I should try this, or what if that would be like? And so I'm wondering if you're seeing that, Stella, in the work that you're doing with clients, where there's certainly folks that are seeing this from a place of want, but maybe there's another group of people who are seeing this from a place of abundance. Like, look at all the different ways and look at all the things and look at all the, everyone has like a, Pornhub premium account now.
Yeah.
Like, so I'm wondering from a place of exploration, if you're seeing that.
Yeah, I mean, I am seeing people finding different kinds of connection. And for some folks, it's more connection. I've talked to, some of my other introvert friends, and I'm talking to more people every day now than I did before we were on lockdown. As somebody who works from home and lives alone a lot of the time, I could go a few days without talking to another human being. And now I have, video chats, phone calls, texting every single day. Um, and I'm seeing people finding new ways. I'm in a Marco Polo group chat with a group of gals. We do femsex parties together, and now we are, in this group chat. And we're a group that we had a group chat on Facebook, and we'd have parties every couple of months. And now we're in this Marco Polo, and people are checking in every single day. And, sometimes they're, flashing their breasts while they're on a bicycle, and they're, doing sexy photo shoots. And, so some of it is sexy and intimate, and a lot of it is just connection. So this group who has been, having sex with each other for a few years now, we're now talking every day. And that's not a thing that we did before. And it's in part because of this new medium and how easy it makes that. So I am seeing new forms of connection, and in some ways deeper connections, because we have to get creative right now.
So what about the people that you're so there's a lot of effort going into people who you're isolated away from. Like, I'm definitely seeing that across my clients as well. And also, people who are like, there's a especially from the beginning, when we were becoming, stay at home was a thing. There was a lot of effort, energy going towards, oh my God, my partner's who I'm not going to be able to see for a while. What I'm seeing is like there was an initial rush of like, how do we make that happen? And then there's like a regulating sort of, there's like a swing back right now, which is to how do you stay connected with the people that we're isolated with? What are you finding? What kind of guidance would you give to those who we are isolated with and not just away from?
I think we need to extend even more compassion and grace to people than usual. Nobody is at their best right now. All of this talk about, oh, we all have all this free time to do things. We're all going to be so productive. Everything's great. Like, of course not. We are going through a collective trauma. And, some of us have a lot of history with trauma, and we kind of know what our trauma responses are. And other people are just figuring that out. So it's really important to have that increased empathy, which is, of course, twice as hard when you are going through those difficult experiences yourself. So just being as gentle and as compassionate as possible, trying to understand that we are in this together. And then, as much as possible, creating those different spaces for different kinds of conversation. Having some sort of routine. If the people are working from home, set your schedule, for 8 hours a day. Maybe you're in your separate rooms or separate corners of the living room, and you have headphones on and you're working. Maybe you have lunch together, maybe not. But finding that time to somehow be away so that it is special when you come back together. I had one client phone call, we were talking about how this couple had been together a long time, how their sex life had been over time, the problems the woman was having being aroused. And something I hear from so many clients is they simply need more time for connection. They need to feel like there's a stronger connection before they can get to that sexual space. And for some people, I'm actually hearing this is helping their sex life, because suddenly they do have more time. Folks who are usually just passing each other in busy schedules can really spend a whole day together now. They can really hold each other for a whole day and then, slide into that sexier space. And, although we are all experiencing a whole lot more stress overall, in some ways we are slowed down a little bit. So I'm hearing from people who were having inhibited levels of desire because of anxiety, actually finding it easier to tap into their desire because certain forms of anxiety have gone away. We're not running from appointment to appointment. So for folks who are in a position where they can stay home and are not still running around, some of those folks are actually finding it easier to connect with partners or easier to find a sexy headspace.
Absolutely. I've definitely noticed that too, that you're some of the anxieties that come with pace of life seems to have been on halt for sure. And the other that I'm finding are people who really struggle with fear of abandonment are actually those who are like isolated with partners. There seems to be a halt on this sort of fear of abandonment because there's like no one's going anywhere. And I think that's also helping people to like have their guard down or be willing to be more connected or not feel anxious around this sort of separation anxiety or fear of abandonment that kicks in. And there's definitely, I do think that it is a pause, and I do think that people need to keep working on that stuff because this is not going to be forever, hopefully. But I am finding that there's this like space have opened for people where they have, we have, most of us being given the gift of time, if nothing else, commuting time. I say to people like, we're not commuting anymore. So that 10, 20, 30 minutes is kind of a gift of time. You're commuting from your bed to your bathroom to your workspace. Same with social arrangements that otherwise, I definitely know that at least 20% of my social arrangements is kind of out of obligation, and those are no longer something that I have to attend. So I feel like there's definitely a gift of time that we've been given, and that's I think that does show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm realizing in this time, yes, I still have anxiety about a lot of things, and there are certain anxieties that have quieted. And I've realized how much I have pushed myself on my schedule, how many appointments, how many classes, coupled with running around, and also how many times I'm going to see friends, how many dates I'm going on, and running over my own boundaries with that. How many times I have a week where I don't give myself a night to be alone, or I don't give myself, a whole day to be in my house. And what, being home for the last month has shown me is that's really important. And I'm hoping I will come out of this knowing a little better what I need and being better able to hold some of those boundaries and, mark off something on my calendar and say, no, actually, this is my night off and I'm not doing anything with anybody, or this is a whole day that I'm going to stay at home. So I think a lot of us are finding the pace that we need our lives to be. People are rediscovering what their natural sleep schedules are. So I'm hoping that some healthy things can come out of this reset.
Mm-hmm. That once we go back, that we'll carry on the lessons that we learned and some of the good things that we got out of this experience. We are thrilled about the idea that we're going to be able not only to continue this conversation with you in a few weeks, but that we are going to be able to dig into some more of the details around how to do this stuff well. We are going to have you join our virtual curiosity salon on Wednesday, April 22nd, at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So you're going to be facilitating a workshop on from pillow talk to sexting, finding your words in kink, sex, and relationships. And so it's everything from knowing what we want to how to ask for it, and exploring things like boundary setting and long distance sex games and sexting and dirty talk and all those types of things. So if you're interested in joining us now from anywhere in the world, you can do that by going on to our Instagram at We Are Curious Foxes and looking at the link in our bio, or our Facebook page at We Are Curious Foxes, and you can find tickets there as well. 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, April 22nd.
Yeah, and you can find more about Stella Harris. I thoroughly recommend it. She's an amazing educator. Her workshops are great. Her storytelling is great. You can visit her website. It's stellaharris.net. That's stellaharris.net. You can also follow her at Stella Erotica on Twitter, or Stella Harris Erotica on Instagram. We're going to put all the stuff in the show notes for sure. She's offering coaching and online classes right now, and you can use the promo code all capitals, stay home, promo code, all capitals, stay home, for 20% off her coaching. As you heard, she's brilliant, she's knowledgeable, she's creative. Stella really meets people where they're at and supports them from that. And I'm so excited to have her back on again as a Foxy educator.
It'll be the most interesting Zoom call that you have been on all month. I promise you that. It will be like any other Zoom call you have done in April. Mm-hmm.
And it's going to make all your Zoom calls to come better.
Yes, no pun intended. And so again, you can find us at We Are Curious Foxes on Facebook, on Instagram, on Patreon. If you join us as a Patreon member, then you actually get lots of discounts and for some of our upcoming events. So for example, every month we do a social, and we used to do that live and in person, and hopefully once again we will. But right now we're doing it virtually, and we are doing it only for Patreon members. We also have soirees that we have started to do, which are our parties. And we did one recently, which we did a pajama party, and we had truth or dare, and we had dancing, and we had different breakout rooms where we played, and we read some good bedtime stories before we all went to bed. And if you are a patron, then you get to go to those events for free. In addition to that, you also have opportunities to ask questions and to check out videos. For example, the one of Stella that we keep referring to, where she did the workshop for us on the anatomy of the vulva, that exists on our Patreon. And you can find all of that there at We Are Curious Foxes on Patreon. If you like what you're hearing, we ask that you share, that you like, and that you review this podcast. It really makes a difference, particularly on Apple. Our hashtag is Change the Noise, because it is important for us that with all of the information that we are getting that has created the shame, that has created the discomfort, that has created the fear, that we are trying to create the antidote to that. And we are trying to create spaces where we can be curious, where we can explore together, and where we can learn who we are and what we want from ourselves and our relationships. And so hashtag Change the Noise.
And we are adding a new segment to our show. So if you have any questions that you would like us to explore on the show, whether it's Jackie and I, or if it makes sense, one of our guests, please give us a call. Good old-fashioned phone call. You can leave us a message. We will play the message on the episode, and we will answer and discuss it. Either Jackie and I, or whoever, if there's somebody who makes sense. And you can do that by calling us at 201-870-0063. That's 201-870-0063. Good old-fashioned phone call. Leave us a message, and we will play it and respond to it on an upcoming episode, and we'll definitely let you know when it's coming out. Also, you can reach out to us and share your ideas in other ways, and definitely social media, or you can email us. Our email for the show is listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com. That's listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com. With any kind of ideas that you might have, any kind of guests that you might want to see on the show, anything that you want us to share out with our audience. Tell us which episodes that has helped you and your journey. Anything that you send, we do read every single email.
Yeah, I think that's good. We want to thank Stella. Thanks, Stella.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and we're so looking forward to your workshop. And until next time, stay curious.
Stay curious.
Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.